Good morning, Bitcoiners. Hello, and welcome back once again to your Bitcoin economic calendar, the news and analysis you need to start the week off right in Bitcoin. I'm your host, Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, co-founder of Ledn, and today is Tuesday, March 29th. We have a great episode for you this week. As always, today we're going to start by talking about the markets in general who have been gaining despite the Fed's recent hawkish tone. We're going to look at some insights there broadly across markets. Second, we're going to look at the recent Bitcoin purchases for the Luna Foundation Guard Reserve. This is an algorithmic stablecoin that we had been covering a few issues ago, and they did start buying Bitcoin for their reserves. We're going to talk about the details of those purchases and what we can expect going forward. Next, we're going to touch on recent news that came out of Grayscale, who actually made an announcement yesterday, which basically threatened the SEC to potentially take legal action depending on the decision that the SEC takes on the GBTC decision to convert it into a spot Bitcoin ETF. We're going to talk about that as well. And last but certainly not least, in the blog version of today's issue, we're going to talk about the Ethereum merge hype, which actually has been picking up steam, and Google search trends for Ethereum merge are reaching all-time highs. So lots to cover. It's going to be a great show. Grab your coffees. Starting as we usually do with Bitcoin, we see that we have had 3 very positive weeks so far on the books. Bitcoin has rallied basically around 27% in the last 3 weeks. Last week, it rallied by 13.63%. So far this week, we're up another 2%. And that's had to do with a lot of the basically a lot of the recent news flow and developments that we're going to get into shortly. First, let's talk about what is happening in Russia and how that is impacting potentially Bitcoin. First up, let's pop up the headline around this that came up around this event. And to break it down, basically, since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 24th, the international sanctions have not ceased on the Kremlin. The international sphere has seized assets, stopped trading Russian native stocks, booted Russian financial institutions from using the SWIFT system, and it has imposed embargoes on oil, gas, and other natural resources. With the ruble and the economy tanking, Russia must look for ways to access capital, or to have access to capital. The Russian head of the country's energy committee, Pavel Savalny, announced that it may start accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment for some of its energy sales. And this is the headline that you saw from Bloomberg the BBC last week. Now, despite all of the sanctions, Europe's dependence on Russian oil and gas is still very much present. Since the invasion on the 24th of February, Europe has paid over $22 billion to Russia for fossil fuels. Something that is surprising is that Russia's oil business has shown some resilience. Here you see the chart. Even despite the sanctions and the market cycles, even after the invasion, Russia continues to export 4.7 million barrels of crude per day. Now, Russia is in need of cash to fund its military equipment and thus has had to continue producing and exporting oil at pre-war levels. And this is what we can see shown in this article here by the New York Times. Now, as some countries are forced to reconsider their financial rails and their foreign reserves, a few references have been made to Bancor. And we wanted to spend a minute here to touch on what Bancor is, that concept, and it's actually quite an interesting one. The excerpt that we're going to read is from Wikipedia, the article that you have on your screen right now, and it basically provides a very simple and I believe accurate description of Bancor that can shine a lot of light into this concept. And so just to read it, the Bancor idea, the Bancor was a supranational currency that John Maynard Keynes and E.F. Schumacher conceptualized in 1940 to 1942 after the Second World War, and which the United Kingdom proposed to introduce as a concept after World War II. And the name comes from the name is inspired by the French words for bank and gold, Bancor, which is quite interesting. Bank's gold, and it was proposed in the 40s, and now we are looking at Bitcoin, which is quite a fascinating concept. So, in simplified terms, the concept behind Bancor was to create a supranational currency, a currency that didn't belong to one particular country, that allowed exporting countries to accumulate Bancor as reserves. So countries that would export more than they import would then accumulate Bancor as they export to international to other trading partners. And the importer countries would then have to borrow Bancor from creditor countries, essentially because they would be importing more than they could produce. So they would have to then borrow because they are at a deficit. Both the exporting countries and the importing countries would basically have limits on how much Bancor they could borrow or how much Bancor they could stack away. And if either of the limits was reached, the country would then basically adjust their currency, whether by appreciating the currency or depreciating the currency. In the case that it had too many reserves, it would essentially appreciate its currency. In the case that it had too much Bancor debt, it would depreciate their local currency. And what this would do is essentially reprice their exports and make that overall global trade balance narrower and basically prevent companies from having these bloated reserves and these bloated debt terms in essence. And that option was, of course, dismissed by the United States, which was a big voice at that table, having essentially come in and played a huge role at the Second World War. And the U.S. essentially dismissed that proposal and instead chose to use or set the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency, initially pegging the U.S. dollar to gold and pegging every other currency against the U.S. dollar. So again, this concept of Bancor, this supranational currency, does have some similarities, I guess, to some of the ideas behind Bitcoin. And it's pretty fascinating to see that conversation spark up again. Now, going back to Russia, interestingly, there was positive commentary after the recent peace talks held in Turkey. And this happened just over the last few days. The news has helped essentially push oil prices lower in this week's trading session so far. Yesterday had a big drop. Today we're seeing a drop again too, and this is just for your benefit, just to show here how much oil has essentially dropped. We're down basically 10% so far for the week, and this again in part due to the positive outcomes out of the peace talks in Turkey. So moving on to other news. There was an interesting headline last week from CoinDesk that talks about Bitcoin topping $44,000 amid rumors of Terra Foundation's accumulating BTC. Now, that is the beauty of the blockchain. Contrary to the headline, there are no rumors. The blockchain allows us to see because it provides transparency and real-time verification. So the Luna Foundation Guard has been purchasing Bitcoin and has accumulated $1.3 billion worth of Bitcoin. The wallet address statement can be seen here. And we can provide a copy of that in the blog version of the file. But the important number to look at here is what they have essentially, what their ending balance is. And we can see they've purchased $1.307 billion worth of Bitcoin, which is pretty interesting. In addition to the Luna Foundation, there's also a couple of factors that could be contributing to Bitcoin's positive price momentum. One of them is the fact that Goldman Sachs and Galaxy Digital announced that they had basically transacted a milestone over-the-counter trade, and there was also plans for Cowen to allow institutional investors to place Bitcoin spot trades. Cowen is essentially a publicly traded U.S. investment bank with a market capitalization of over $700 million. So a couple of interesting news there. Let's go look at some Bitcoin fundamentals and some of the market signals. Here we see that the futures curve is actually now in a very clean contango. Earlier in the year, we saw that there was some backwardation on the March dates, and we saw the curve essentially dip down around March. Obviously, we're now through the March expiration, and we can see that every other expiration is now priced at a price higher than the current spot. There is a little bit of flatness here on the curve within the month of April, from the April 8th, essentially from the current spot until the April expiration. But again, we see them very, the contango looks quite healthy actually beyond April. What we had seen in the past on the curve is what's called backwardation, which means a price in the future is trading lower than the current price, or a price, say, in June is trading lower than the price in May. So there's a dip in the curve, and we were seeing this back when the March expiration was still on. Now, backwardation occurs when investors expect the future price of an asset to trade at a lower price than the current one. And this can happen for a variety of reasons. As we can see, there doesn't seem to be that concern anymore in the eyes of investors, with most future contract deliveries being priced well above current spot, and the subsequent months priced above the prior month. So essentially it creates an upward sloping curve. Now, another interesting thing to look at on this front is the fact that with the increase in prices, we've once again seen the futures open interest start moving. And then let's take a look here at the futures open interest for Bitcoin. 1 second. And here it is. So like we see basically it has now, let's just zoom into the most recent 2 weeks just to see. And it's pretty clear. We've now gone from about 13 billion to about 17 billion of open interest in a matter of a month. So pretty substantial and pretty interesting. Again, looking at the Bitcoin perpetual swaps, the funding rates for the perpetual swaps, let's just pick the ones here from FTX. We see that they are now well above zero. And they've stayed positive over the last little bit. So that is definitely a positive or an encouraging sign, or means that investors have turned a little more bullish on Bitcoin. So lastly, also hot off the press is this morning was the fact that Grayscale, the operator of the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, threatened to sue the SEC if it rejects its upcoming spot Bitcoin ETF proposal. As we know, the Grayscale is looking to convert its Grayscale Bitcoin Trust into a spot Bitcoin ETF. This ups the ante for the SEC's decision and could result in GBTC units reducing some of their discount to the fund's net asset value. The fund units currently trade at a 28% discount to the value that its assets hold. And just to take a quick peek at this, this graph here tracks the discount on GBTC, and we can see that it's actually gone up quite a bit from its bottom of 28% discount. That discount has now been reduced to, call it 27%. So it seems to be moving or trending in the direction of tightening. So we'll continue to monitor this and keep you updated. Now onwards to what's ahead for the week. And as always, we wrap up with what's ahead for the week. In the week ahead, investors will be paying a close eye to several key events. First off, starting with the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine being held in Istanbul, Turkey, which we covered recently, and they seem to be off to a good start. Additionally, some U.S. economic indicators will be released this week, including jobless claims, producers manufacturers manufacturers index, and the employment report, GDP revisions, and consumer price inflation as well, personal consumption expenditures as well. That price index is the one that the Fed tracks very closely. And we have a few others, but those would be the most relevant ones. On the job side, economists expect about 460,000 jobs to be added for the month of March, and the unemployment rate should drop to below 3.7%. Outside of the US, investors will keep an eye on Eurozone inflation data, which is set to be released on Friday. Economists expect the CPI to hit a new record in Europe amid rising energy and commodity prices. So Friday could have some interesting news in terms of European inflation. As we've discussed, the Luna Foundation Guard has been purchasing Bitcoin for its Forex reserves. As of the weekend, the wallet held about $1.1 billion worth of Bitcoin, and Terra founder Do Kwon has given the green light to purchase, or has the green light allegedly to purchase up to $3 billion worth of Bitcoin in the open market. They have plenty of open powder, and LFG can continue buying Bitcoin in the same manner that they have so far. As per the last report that we discussed from yesterday, the firm holds approximately $1.3 billion, and they could continue buying and provide a strong bid in the days and weeks to come. The anticipation, along with what we covered about the upcoming Ethereum merge, could be what's keeping perpetual swap funding rates elevated as investors look to capitalize on a potential move higher. Interestingly, the short interest for Bitcoin that we have seen or had seen mounting on Bitfinex over the last 4 weeks seems to have disappeared. Bears seem to have been squeezed out of the way for now. With this, we reach the end of our analysis. We hope that you enjoyed listening, watching, reading as always. And we wrap up with a summary of the dates and times of the upcoming events. Wednesday, 8:15 a.m., we get the ADP unemployment report out of the U.S. Tomorrow, we also get the GDP revision, gross domestic product revision for the U.S. And we get Fed activity. The Richmond Fed President Tom Barking has a speech at 9:15. And the Kansas City Fed President Esther George speaks at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. Thursday, we get initial jobless claims, personal consumption expenditure out of the U.S., and Chicago PMI, among a few others. And then on Friday at 8:30 a.m., we get non-farm payrolls. 9:05 a.m., Chicago Fed President Charles Evans speaks. And we also get the CPI data out of Europe. On Saturday, we have a special weekend event from the Fed with Fed President John Williams, New York Fed President John Williams speaking. So it's going to be a busy week, lots to cover, and a couple of moving pieces. We'll keep you updated right here through the economic calendar and through our social media at Hodl with Ledn. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something, if you enjoyed the show, I welcome you to thumbs up, like the show, subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends. If you don't yet have a Ledn account, I welcome you to check out ledn.io and learn how you can start earning the best interest rates for your Bitcoin and USDC savings. And we have the best rates for loans if you need dollar liquidity and don't want to sell your Bitcoin. Check out our latest product, the Bitcoin Mortgage, which lets you buy a house as big as your stack. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week. See you next time.